They used to have the all-inclusive model, and they really don't anymore. They've tried to strip that out. They're now seeing that people are recognizing that. People are going to start doing the math. It might take a couple of years for them to realize it, but I don't know about you. I think you do stay on property regularly, but I haven't stayed on property at Disney in 10 years. I don't see the value in it. And if I can stay at a place in 192 for half the price and get the same benefits of the FastPass system by paying for it, I'm still paying less for a vacation than somebody staying at a value resort, and I'm getting the same benefit of it.
That is Tim Grassey of the Marty Called podcast, who is here to talk about all the latest changes from Disney, including the Disney Genie Plus paid FastPass system. It's going to be fun, I promise. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 148 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Excited to bring you this longer podcast. There was a lot to cover. Disney has come out and announced now their paid FastPass service, Disney Genie Plus, Lightning Lane, additional attractions, lots of different names. We're going to talk about them all, how they may impact us personally, also just the direction Disney is taking. That's why I thought it was the perfect time to talk with Tim Grassey of the Marty Called podcast and WDWThemeparks.com. On that show, Tim and Josh and Skipper Ben dive into all these issues. They did an episode almost 3 hours long talking about this and a few other things. This won't be that long, but I feel like there's still an interesting way to approach it. I try not to be an alarmist about these things or to just say, I'm never going back. One, I know that's not true. Haven't been since before the pandemic. I definitely want to go back. However, that doesn't mean I love what they're doing either. I feel like the decision is short-sighted. They'll probably make a lot of money. I mean, I think of myself. I will definitely spend for Disney Genie Plus and individual attractions like we talk about on this episode. It's going to depend which ones. So I can't be this is the craziest thing ever. Who would pay for this? Because I will. But that doesn't mean I love the system either. I feel like there's a few things they did with it that we'll talk about that weren't so bad. And I thought it was going to be worse, actually. But I feel like overall, I try to take an even-handed approach. I think this is going to cost my family more. It's also going to add complexities that I don't really want to deal with on a trip. But I hope that overall we could still find a way to have a good trip and then adjust our finances accordingly. So we're going to dig into that. I also found it really interesting to talk about how Universal is responding and could respond to the way Disney is approaching it. Just keep building more things, Universal. You're doing okay there. Also, what's Disney going to do after their current run of headliners? Because you have Tron, Guardians, and Ratatouille, and Harmonious, and a few other things, Kite Tales. But overall, how are they going to respond further on? We talk about that. We also have some fun questions at the end. I promise it's not too dour or downward looking, but we try to be fair and also realistic about how it impacts people and Disney on the whole. And before I get to it, I did want to say, I know it's really tough time out there right now. We have beyond the pandemic, which I know is still raging. You have hurricanes. I know a lot of people are struggling with that. Also, the situation in Texas. There's a lot of things that are much more important to our daily lives than whether Disney adds FastPass service. However, for me, I feel like just almost getting a little riled up about this is a little therapeutic in terms of, okay, you can listen to Tim and I kind of dig into this for an hour and a half and not think about everything else. And that's the case for me when I was editing it this week. I really was kind of just got into thinking about all this rather than some other kind of bigger things that are still kind of going on in the world and our challenge. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It's a long one, so let's get to it. Here is Tim Grassey. Tim, how does it feel to be back for the 6th time? Can you believe you spent this much time talking with me about important stuff?
I'm gonna lose the audience right away here. So if you're familiar with former baseball manager and coach Don Zimmer,
yes.
At one point, one of his players went up to him and said, "Do you realize that you've spent 26 days of your life listening to the national anthem?" So if you look at the amount of time that you and I have spent talking about Disney, it adds up. I think we're pushing a day at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we might have like 2 or 3 baseball games.
Yeah, there you go.
How long they sometimes go.
Or 2 Red Sox games, yeah.
Well, yeah, I get the baseball references. I'm sure, I don't know if everyone else does, but being a struggling Cardinals fan right now, we're hanging in there. But, Tim.
The Sox are losing 8-2.
The Cardinals are playing a doubleheader tomorrow because there's like a monsoon. I don't even know how they're near the playoffs, but we will stay focused here. We have a lot of things to talk about here, Tim.
I agree.
There's been a few announcements from Disney. You've covered them very well on your podcast, Marty Called, with Ben and Josh. I've covered them a little bit here, but not the latest, recently. But I feel like this is a good time. We've had times where we've had to be like, let's look at some fun ideas for show. But this is like, there's so much to cover. So we're going to cover some of the big ones here. We're going to cover Disney Genie, Lightning Lane, all those different names, related things. There's a lot of info, but I feel like we can cover in kind of a different way rather than just saying this is terrible. But I know before that, you were at Walt Disney World recently, like last month.
Yep.
So I'd love to know just overall, too. I mean, it had been a while since you've been there. What did you think about it?
So last trip was October of 19. I actually was, unfortunately, down there in June of 20 for a funeral, but parks weren't open. We did walk around Disney Springs, and that in itself kind of just felt nice to be back in the Disney environment. But this was really the true reintroduction back into the Disney environment. And the reason why I do a podcast, you do a podcast, everybody that's listening listens to these podcasts, is because these parks feel like home to us. And yes, there were things that weren't the same. Certain rules for safety and whatnot were different, but it felt good to be home. And that's the nicest, sappiest way I can say it. Beyond that, though, there was some stuff that was new to me. I hadn't experienced Rise of the Resistance. I hadn't experienced Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. So getting to experience those 2 new things, very much a fan of both attractions. Dan and I were talking before he hit the record button about Rise of the Resistance. If anybody hasn't been on it, this isn't news, but it is an amazing attraction. But one thing I will tell people is don't watch ride videos. You don't need to. You know that it's good. And getting the surprises after surprise after surprise after surprise on that attraction just makes it that much better, especially for that first ride. I loved it. It was great to see some friends that I hadn't seen in a couple of years as well. And I view Disney World as a friend. It's kind of sappy, as I said, but at the same time, it just felt good to be back.
Yeah, I totally get that. As somebody, I have not been, but I feel like, especially early on too, like last year, it was just, it was closed and there was, now we're able to move around a little more freely, but still not get there. But I just feel like when I'm able to get there, whether it's there or even to California, it's going to be good. I think the wait is going to make me appreciate it more, I think. And I haven't done Rise of the Resistance or Runaway Railway, especially excited about Rise of the Resistance. I think it's going to be cool. I like that there's going to be things like Ratatouille and maybe other things that I didn't get to see. So you were able to still enjoy it because you were there. Were they requiring, I don't want to get too far down this road, but I'm just curious, masks and everything. Sure. And COVID. What was it like when you were there? Because I know it's changed. It even changed more recently where they went kind of back the other way.
So the very last day of the trip, I was only there 4 days, but the last day of the trip was when they reinstituted the indoor mask policy. It's 95 degrees. It's hot. People don't want to wear masks, but it's a safety thing. Anybody that says otherwise is, we're not going to get into that level of dialogue, but that's what they're doing it for. And you can call it theater, you can call it whatever you want, but they're a company. They have the right to do this. And if you want to experience what they have to offer, you play by their rules. Politics aside, why it's a political issue, I don't know, and that's not the nature of this show either. Having said that, I didn't mind it all that much. And we've been dealing globally with a world of crap for a year and a half, and that's an understatement. So doing something that felt normal, regardless of the things that I had to wear over my face and over my mouth and nose, irrelevant. I was able to enjoy it. I was able to separate the fact that I was uncomfortable and hot from the fact that I was in a place that I loved.
No, I think that's a great point because really, yeah, it's not going to be the same right now, probably for a while, but I think it's awesome you were able to go. And one thing I thought was fun is you met up with Skipper Ben, your co-host there, and you guys even did a short podcast segment while on the People Mover and even had it get stuck. So that was entertaining. I think that, because I remember when Ricky and Ben used to do that, and just a few years ago. I'm sure it's been many years, but I think it's cool that you guys got to meet up and record something there, because that's always fun to hear, especially when I'm sitting here at home.
Ben's biggest mistake was telling me his family plans, so I adjusted mine accordingly. I say that in jest. He does have a great family, and we give each other a lot of crap on this show and on our own show. But it was great to spend time with them, and as I said, great to see friends. That was actually my first time meeting Ben in person, but great to see friends that I hadn't seen in years. Every time we go down there, we try to meet up with people, but it doesn't always work out. So if you're not going down for 2 years because of the world that we live in, then you got a lot of catching up to do.
For sure. Well, I think I have one more question about you going, but this is going to lead into what we're going to talk about in a minute. So you were there, all standby, and obviously I think they don't have the distancing they had before, but how did the standby lines move? That's kind of the first part. And second, were the wait times that were posted very different than what you experienced? Those are kind of my two big questions about kind of how things worked, because I think that does lead into what we're going to talk about.
Sure. So I had mentioned this on our show. I'm not going to presume that everybody listened to the 2-hour and 45-minute trip report that Ben and I did, but for your headliners, for your new things, your relatively new things, Slinky Dog Dash, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, Flight of Passage, all of those, they were relatively true to what the posted wait times were in my experience. The very first thing that I did when I got there, when I went to Animal Kingdom, was I waited 2.5 hours for Flight of Passage. And that was my own masochistic approach to touring that day. But I did it. I was by myself. I could make that choice. In hindsight, not the best choice, but nothing against Flight of Passage. It was just that it kind of hamstrung me for the rest of the day. But to your question, I would say most things were probably 50 to 75% of whatever the posted wait was. And because it was standby only, this, I'm sure most of your listeners know this, the queues right now, the standby queues, are designed to accommodate maybe 20 to 30% of the hourly capacity of an attraction. So everything was spilling out into the walkway. And I waited in what was posted as a 45-minute wait for Big Thunder Mountain, and the line was backed up to Country Bear Jamboree. And I looked at it and was like, see, it's 45 minutes. I'm looking through it. I'm guessing I'm waiting less than 45 minutes for this. And sure enough, I was on the ride in 32 minutes. And the lines were moving. Even that 2.5-hour line at Flight of Passage, I'm fairly certain at least one, if not two theaters were down, but it was still regularly moving. Because that's the most popular attraction in that park, or at least the highest demand attraction in that park, you get the full FastPass allocation under pre-Genie rules. You would get full FastPass allocation, and you would get all of the disability passes used for that. And the line just crept along very, very slowly. The standby line would always move very slowly in Flight of Passage, but that wasn't the case here, even with, I'm thinking, at least one, possibly two theaters down. So I welcome that type of touring, and other than that one-off on Flight of Passage, I don't think I waited more than 45 minutes for anything in the middle of July, or end of July.
That's what I've heard for the most part. Yeah, I mean, because there's always going to be, I go, both you and I believe, went when we were younger, pre-FastPass, and there are a lot of benefits to each, FastPass and FastPass Plus. I feel like there are ways to do it, but I'm kind of used to that as a kid, where lines generally moved, but you waited in them. And, the pathway thing, that's a challenge we were seeing, too, with FastPass. Big Thunder, I don't understand why that always is out the door, or out the way, but I understand because they've kind of adapted to FastPass, it's different. But, speaking of adapting to FastPass, Tim, we should just get right to it, because Disney, it's funny because I had heard on the Disney Dish a little before this was announced that they were going to wait till after the 50th to announce it because they didn't want to kind of cast a shadow over the celebration of the 50th anniversary. Well, I think they might have done that a bit. But Disney announced, of course, I'm not going to go through all of it because I get the impression most people have read about it, so I'm not going to explain it all again. But we had, Disney Genie, which is kind of the touring plans imitator, Genie Plus, which is the FastPass Plus replacement, more Max Pass-ish, and then the Lightning Lane, which is FastPass. Even when I try to go fast, it takes a while. And then things without really a name where it's called like additional attractions where you pay for extra. But those
individual
that's kind of the basics.
Attraction service. It just rolls off the tongue.
Oh my gosh. I have a degree in journalism and English. I don't really use that in my job that much, and I was always terrible at things like creative names and designs, but really, it's not that hard. But I'm here to talk about the system in general. So I feel like we could talk for 6 hours on this, or 2 hours and 45 minutes, if you will. But I feel like I just kind of want to dig into it more. Let's start a little bit without immediately going in, because to me, there's one part that I think is the most challenging, financially and also for a lot of people. But I want to talk about things that might actually not be terrible. Okay. Like, I know there are parts of it that I think they solved a few issues here, at least if you compare it to FastPass Plus. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. I mean, are there parts of the program, we have to pull out parts of it?
Yeah.
Like beyond the names that actually do make sense and in a different setup might actually be good.
So, I know you didn't want to harp on the names. The names are stupid. Let's call them what they are.
Yes,
the names are stupid. There's no sugarcoating it. And it's not a matter of disliking any one name individually. It's the fact that there are 4 names that is what makes us stupid. So let's call that what it is.
Stamp it.
Yes. The names are objectively stupid. Anyway, my initial reaction was, I don't hate this. And I'm probably on an island by myself amongst Disney fans. But to your question, let's look at it and dissect it a little bit more thoroughly. So I wanted to grade it, as I joked on our show. I'll grade it on a 1 to 10 scale and give it a C. It's a C grade for me because I hated FastPass Plus. Every one of these systems are going to have people that enjoyed them, that appreciated them. For me, FastPass Plus, I took advantage of it probably more than anybody that's listening to your show here. There were ways to cheat this system. It was remarkably broken up until maybe the last year and a half that it operated. And all you needed to do was know the system a little bit, and you could take advantage of it. But beyond that, if you knew it and you knew the flaws in the system, you could really take advantage of it. So for me, FastPass Plus was a D or even an F. The thing that we asked for when we knew paid FastPass was coming was we wanted MaxPass. That was what people said. But the advantage of MaxPass, or the benefits of MaxPass, was that there was an alternative that was free. You didn't have to pay for MaxPass and still get the FastPass benefit. MaxPass was a time convenience because you didn't have to trek around the 2 parks. And it also saved time as well. I think they shaved off half an hour for attractions that were further out on the FastPass spectrum. Something like Radiator Springs Racers, if your reservation was 5 hours out, you could get a new MaxPass in an hour and a half. Whereas with the paper ones, it was 2 hours. But I put MaxPass and original FastPass in Florida as a B. They had their advantages. There are certainly some people that would prefer just a standby line, but I enjoyed them. I think they worked. They served their purpose for the guest. Maybe didn't serve Disney's purpose of spreading out the crowds the way they wanted to, but as a guest satisfaction tool, I think they worked pretty well. For me, what I was hoping for was a free version of MaxPass, just basically the digitized version of FastPass Plus for day of reservations. But you want to take away a positive, I hated the 60-day booking window for FastPass Plus. I don't know what I'm going to have for breakfast tomorrow morning. I sure as hell don't know what ride I'm going to want to ride in 60 days or when I'm going to want to ride it. And when you've got an environment that is catering to children, you can't lock them into a 1 hour window. You just simply can't. It's not a realistic thing when you're trying to do it 2 months out. Just not. So that was where I view it as a positive. But it's certainly not perfect, and certainly not what I would prefer. We've just kind of lowered our expectations all in to say, all right, well, it's not great, but it's better than what we had before.
Yeah, and I think, for me, the biggest thing was losing the 60-day window that I thought was a positive. But I feel like, I mean, even like I looked at it again, like you said, my first thought was, well, that could have been a lot worse because we saw what they had in Paris, where it was, and granted, we didn't think it'd be the same, but there was this thought like, well, okay, in Paris, if you convert it, it's not exactly the same because people make different salaries and everything. But if you convert it, it's going to be like, I think it was like $10 to $19 or something like that. Yeah, per attraction. And the attractions, some of them are like, the one thing that came out was like Buzz Lightyear for family of four, $60. Like, no, that's not going to happen. So this seems better, but it's one of those things where I think part of it is like I say $15 a day or $20 a day. I'm like, okay. Like I was thrilled. I was pumped to, thrilled might be an exaggeration, but pumped to pay for Max Pass. We were going to go to Disneyland because I was like, this is going to help us. We have not been there as a family. I've been there, but not my kids. This will be great. But I look at this and I'm almost to the point where I'm like, if you really add it up, I have a family of four. Let's say we go 5 days, for example. $15, $60, $300 extra for something that's not the Lightning Pass. The only real benefit is the 60 days. But I don't know. That's where it gets tricky. And I'm not even talking about the other step. So it's one of those where it's like, I guess the question is, have they just kind of, I hate to say it, beat us into submission a bit with so many things they've removed, perks, Magical Express, resort parking, whatever, that when there's just $15 a person, you're like, well, I thought it was going to be 50 or 40. Could that be a bigger problem than just Lightning Lane in the future?
I believe that they focus group everything, but at the same time, I also believe there's an element of this where they just legitimately do not know what they're doing. They have not had a true parks person at the head of the company for 20 years. And I'm going back to Eisner with Wells still alive. I think that is really the last time that they've had somebody that fundamentally understood how the parks worked. And don't get me wrong, you've read Disney War, you've heard plenty of stories about Michael Eisner where he totally missed the boat, but having Frank Wells as that person to ground him in reality or to say, hey, good, funny joke, Michael, that sort of thing was a little bit, was certainly beneficial. And I say this not to be somebody that's critical of Bob Iger, but he, by his own admission, was not a parks person. You read every book about Disney that's ever printed, so I'm sure you read his biography. And
I did.
And he pointedly said it in that. He said that parks aren't really my thing, and I'm not quoting him exactly. But when you look at Bob Chapek, he's a merchandise guy. His big wins in his career were things like the Disney Vault and Disney Movies Anywhere, and what ultimately turned into Movies Anywhere. So those are things that are not really parks related. And it doesn't mean that they're bad executives, but Bob Chapek, I'm not convinced that he's a good executive.
Yeah.
That's another story altogether. But I think in terms of how they're positioning the parks, I think they're all over the place. They're all over the place from a marketing standpoint. Are you marketing it as an all-inclusive? Are you a luxury brand or a value brand? What are you doing here? I think there's indecision here, and the company hasn't figured it out yet. I don't even think that they know what the company is at this point. Are they a tech company? Are they an entertainment company? Are they a merchandise company? Are they a theme park company? What is it? So these are questions where, thankfully, in the various industries that they're in, they have the cachet where they can play ball in multiple arenas. But when it comes to the parks, they've made significant capital investments. The Next Gen project is one of them, where they spent, what they'll tell you is $1 billion. It very well could be 2 or 3 times that. And I think the goal of that was to not get in an attraction building war with Universal, and it didn't work. So from 2017 to 2022, they built more attractions in that time frame than they ever did, other than maybe the building of Epcot. And I suspect that whatever their goal is for Genie Plus, Genie, Individual Attraction Service, Lightning Lane, starring Figment, Adventure Magic Wish, whatever they're going to call it, it's probably not going to be here in 5 to 7 years, if not a shorter time period. And if the goal here is to avoid another attraction building war with Universal, they're not going to win because Universal has a third park in the works. And if Disney were to announce 5 attractions tomorrow, Universal is going to open that park before any of those 5 attractions are within 2 years of opening. So they are going to continue to lose ground. and they've never been more vulnerable in Central Florida, especially, than they are today.
Yeah, you hit on so many different things, and we'll hit on a lot of them as we go. But I didn't want to go too far without. I mean, you think about where Disney has really excelled. I mean, that Iger book, for example, the parts that I found most interesting and where he felt most comfortable writing were about his acquisitions and how brilliant. And I thought it was really well written. I enjoyed the book, and I actually came to appreciate him more after it. But you get through it, and it's like brilliant move with Pixar, brilliant move with Marvel. I hate to use brilliant again, but I'm kind of going there. Brilliant move with Star Wars.
It's not incorrect.
Or with Lucasfilm. Yeah, but then you look, too, at those, or even at, you could say, Disney Animation, they have really strong leaders. I'm not going to dig in, but Kevin Feige or even Kathleen Kennedy, they've done some good things. Rise of Skywalker, okay. But, I mean, The Mandalorian, whatever. They've done a lot of good things, or you bring in people like Favreau and everyone else. Or, for example, Pixar Animation, now that Lasseter's gone, they've got a really strong group there. The parks...
They don't have
that equivalent.
And you just hit on some things right there. I was thinking about this on my drive home today, and I thought, is there anybody in the Disney company, and this goes to Bob Chapek, is there anybody in the Disney company that is irreplaceable? I think there's only one person, and I think it's Kevin Feige. I think everybody else in the company, and you hit across a bunch of different platforms. Kathleen Kennedy is close to retirement herself.
Right.
She has been an industry standard for 4 decades at this point. And there are some people that love her, there are some people that hate her, but regardless, she's been an industry standard for decades. The team at Pixar, while very good, none of them are John Lasseter. And John Lasseter's personal and now public issues aside, he was largely indispensable. And to say that Pixar and Disney Animation didn't suffer a hit when he went away is just ignorant. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't have gone away, but it means that creatively they took a hit. Kevin Feige, I think, is the most indispensable person in Disney right now. And right now, that is the most sure thing. But the counter argument to that is we don't know what the entertainment media is going to bring tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now. And by nature of people not going to movie theaters anymore, he too may also be replaceable, because the demand for those $1.5 billion movies that he puts out once a year, or sometimes $2 to $3 billion movies that he puts out once a year, that is not necessarily how we're going to consume entertainment in the future. So that kind of goes across a bunch of different platforms there, and we are already derailed from whatever the Genie Lightning Lane topic.
No, I think this is important, though, because I think it relates. It's a larger question. Yeah. Because, and we'll talk about the individual attractions in a minute, but you think about, for a while, you could have said, well, Imagineering has people, or Marty Sklar, of course, when he was there, or you even looked at people like Joe Rohde, and Kevin Rafferty got more well-known as he was going out, but who was doing a lot for a long time.
Sure.
And they're gone. I mean, Marty obviously passed away, but, Joe and Kevin retired, and Joe left for
Joe's going to Mars, so.
Yeah, everything else. But and a lot of other people connected to them, and a lot of other Imagineers left. And it doesn't mean everything's doom and gloom, but you have a lot of younger people that are coming in. It's just a different culture, and that probably leads to some of the announcements that have some good things, and then some things I just don't understand. I don't understand some of the things they've done, because it just seems counterintuitive in so many cases.
There's a lot of contradictory things, and we haven't mentioned Josh D'Amaro. I think there are things he is doing. He has largely been valued by the people that worked for him and around him, and he's largely been pretty good for the fans as well. But I also think that as somebody that probably has a direct line to Bob Chapek, there's a component of what he is doing where he has to toe the company line now. And not that he wasn't before, but if they say do something that he doesn't necessarily agree with, and I don't know if this is the case, but let's say that there's a project in Epcot that he doesn't like. That decision's already been made, and it is above his pay grade, despite how high he is on that ladder. I do think, and I've just kind of heard through the grapevine, whether there's any merit to this, is that it has largely been him that is pushing back the Splash Mountain refurbishment in Florida until after the 50th. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I could see him recognizing that, all right, yes, this attraction is problematic. Yes, we have an update in the works, but let's keep the classics in place for the 50th, and then we can rectify things. There's plenty of other things that need some change and some things that are a little bit quicker to do than update Splash Mountain. I also think that was another example of Disney announcing something 2 to 3 years before they were ready to break ground on it, which is another problem at hand here. But you had Len on a couple of episodes ago, and he hit on this problem about where Imagineering is largely focused on keeping their job. People that are in Imagineering like the title of being an Imagineer, and therefore don't necessarily want to rock the boat. That wasn't the case 20 years ago, and that's it's unfortunately a function of the executive team that oversees them and not necessarily of the creatives themselves. Disney as a company houses the biggest collection of creative minds on the planet, or at least it should. And when those creative minds are hamstrung, then it's a disservice to those creative minds as well as the people that are intended to appreciate it, like you and me. I hope pressure's put on them to do great things. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I don't want to go too much down the negative road, just because I know that there are so many people at all the groups we talked about that are want to do the best work possible. Like, we've seen it. I mean, you mentioned Rise of the Resistance.
It's incredible.
Or even I think of like Pandora, which again, talk about something that got announced. It took years to get going. And I still go there and I'm like, I can't believe this worked.
It's a work of art.
I don't understand.
It absolutely
is. It's incredible. So they could still, it's not like they haven't done anything really cool in 30 years or 20 years. They've done some great things.
I think art direction is still on point right now at Imagineering.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So, but, unfortunately, when you have these headliners that are so popular, and I'm landing our plane back on the runway here to talk about, I don't know, what did you call it again? Can you tell me the individual attractions?
Individual attraction service.
I'm just going to keep this, and I'm going to cut you in every time I don't know what it
That'll
is
work.
when I'm doing a future show. Okay, so this is the one.
Can I drop another baseball reference?
Yeah, go ahead.
The movie Moneyball, you're going to point to me, and I'm going to say he gets on base, but instead you're going to say individual attraction service.
You're going to be the Jonah Hill,
exactly,
just hanging out there. You can just point to, and he's not ready for the whole.
I'll be playing the role of Fat Jonah Hill this week, and probably next week and the week after.
Oh, it's funny. But speaking of money, so Disney has announced, we don't know exactly how much. It's probably going to be surge pricing, actually similar to what baseball tickets are now, though much lower right now, not to keep talking about baseball. But they've announced, they kind of tried to hide it a little bit, but that high demand attractions are not even going to be included in the Disney Genie Plus. They're going to have their lightning lane, but it's only if you pay extra per attraction, which kind of like what they're doing at Paris, but this is a smaller collection. They said you can only do 2, but they didn't say for sure there'd only be 2. I know we've seen the list, the rumored list I heard you reference it on your show. So for me, personally, this is challenging, like, again, going with a family, and then you have to make all these microtransaction decisions, like, is it really worth paying X for Test Track that I've done, or whatever? I'm curious for your thoughts, because, setting aside Rise of the Resistance, which to me, sure, I'll pay for that.
You've already given in. You've already given in by making that statement, and that's not a bad thing. That's what,
it feels terrible.
But that you've already conceded that, all right, for this I will, and that means that you've already. Do you play any mobile games that you like that are freemium games where you
some, but I rarely ever spend the money.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
So, for most people that play those games that do want to pay to play or pay to advance in the game, it really is getting that first taste of that extra, whatever in-game currency it is, or whatever it is to kind of advance you further in the game. Once you've done it, now you're hooked. You really are. You've committed to it. It's a marketing thing, but it's also a psychological thing where Disney is banking on this. They see that you're not actually physically pulling out your wallet. You're pressing a button on your phone, or you're double-clicking it, or you're using a facial recognition to verify your credit card that you've already put in there, and it doesn't feel like you've actually spent money. And I said this on my show as well. Think of your average Disney trip that you go on, and when you come back from that trip, do you know within $500 how much you spent on that vacation? In most cases, the answer is no.
Yeah.
In most cases.
I was thinking about it. And great for podcasting that I just paused.
The dramatic effect really works out. I'm glad that I was talking over it for efficacy's sake. So anyway, but to that point, that's what they're banking on. That's absolutely what they're banking on. They use words like spontaneous in the sales pitch for Genie, Genie Plus, Lightning Lane, etc. And really what it meant was impulse buying. It's absolutely impulse buying. And if I had the option on my last trip when I saw that 2.5 hour long line at Flight of Passage to get on that ride for $20 in 10 minutes, I would absolutely have done it. And I think what you're also seeing is you're not seeing a lot of those 7-day trips. I hear more and more, and granted it's anecdotally, of people that are doing those 2 and 3 day trips. And they want to maximize their efficiency during those 2 and 3 day trips. So you're going to see that a lot more, and it's especially as Disney continues to jack up the prices on everything. So if I can do more in a 2-day trip than I was previously doing in a 4-day trip, then I'm going to try to slam all that together and not pay for 2 extra days of a hotel room, 2 extra days of park passes, 2 extra days of food, all of that stuff. So the takeaway here is, what is that magic price point? And you hit on something that kind of circulated as fact, a Touring Plans article. And I say this with absolutely all due respect to Touring Plans. They're an incredible website. But it was speculation, and it was said as speculation in that article, but it was perceived as fact because of the source, because it came from Touring Plans, because they do have inside information. And the speculation was a $4 to $24 price point for these things. The speculation was 2 attractions per park, and I don't know that that's true. I think that at the Animal Kingdom especially, really only makes sense for Flight of Passage, maybe Navi River Journey to be included in this. But I also think that what they say on day 1 isn't going to be what they're going to do on day 90. I think this is going to move, and it's going to move significantly. And if it fails, if they're not seeing the amount of money being spent what they want to be, or if they just kind of see a general outrage or discontent about it, they're not going to have another choice but to change it. But the thing that I fear are what you asked about at the beginning on my trip is they can absolutely manipulate wait times, and the most ignorant amongst the guests are going to see that, and they are going to pay that upcharge price. Because if you walk up to something like Kilimanjaro Safaris, which was one of the rumored attractions, I'm throwing this out there because I'm always wrong. I don't think Kilimanjaro Safaris is going to be an upcharge attraction. But let's say that it is, hypothetically here. You see a 60-minute wait for Kilimanjaro Safaris, and you can get on that ride using the Lightning Lane queue for $5 for your family of 4, $5 each. You're probably going to make that call in some cases. But if that same wait is half an hour, which is what it really is, not what's posted, you might not get in that line for $5. You might just wait. You might just wait the half an hour. So there is a motivation, a very deliberate motivation for Disney to intentionally boost up the wait times to sell more product. So it's another situation where Disney is creating a problem artificially or in real life and charging for the solution.
Yeah, that's something that I've been concerned about too. And I know there's great resources like the Lines app that Touring Plan does.
But 2% of the crowds use that.
Right. Well, I'm talking about, for me, there are resources, but they're going to become even more the Lines app is going to become more valuable because of things like this. But I hate, beyond pulling back a little bit, because I feel like, you're hitting on all the right points with this. Is there a chance? I think a lot of people, especially if it's a reasonable price point, will probably throw the money at it. But there's a few different steps there. One, if people don't, or if people I'm just wondering how it could impact the standby lines anyway. Because right now you have FastPass Plus, which still not everyone uses. People totally don't always understand it. And then it slows down the standby waits, especially for things like your Pirates and Spaceship Earth and all that.
Yep.
But when you get into these kind of situations where, like you mentioned, you waited 2.5 hours for Flight of Passage and the line moved steadily, and there probably were other factors like theaters and such. But if they offer that money, and a lot of people, I think they'll do it, but let's say they price it too high and people don't do it. And then all of a sudden, you have this case where the standby line moves fast. And then, I don't know, there's just so many weird things. I think they're going to have to do a lot of tweaks.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I feel like no matter what they do, how can Disney can't predict what guests are really going to do, because guests will do different things, right, with a free, in quotes, FastPass Plus than they will when they pay money, even if they don't think about it. Somewhere in the back of their head, it's going to impact everything they do.
There's no way they get it right 100%. It's impossible to, because let's say they roll this out on October 1st, which I think would be a very big mistake. I think they should roll it out either 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, or nowhere near October 1st. But let's say that they roll it out in 2 weeks, that they press the go button in 2 weeks. That's probably as good a time as any to do it. Light crowds in September. A pandemic still going on. I don't know if you looked at wait times today. Actually, no, you did. We talked about it. Wait times today, the day that we're recording this, there were 10 minutes in the middle of the day for your headliners. It was ridiculously quiet in the parks today for a multitude of reasons. But that's the time to do it, because you're trying to test a system that relies on tens of thousands of people as data points in that system. And it's not going to work as predictably as you want it to do in models. I'm sure they've modeled it. They have certainly accumulated tons of data on the original FastPass, tons of data in the original FastPass Plus, and presumably pulling some data from France as well. All of that information is there. But until they roll this out in mass, they're not going to know what's going to happen, how it's going to manifest itself. So when that happens, that goes back to what I said, where day one is probably going to be different than day 60. They're gonna have to tweak it, and they didn't lock in what those attractions were. I think deliberately they didn't say it's going to be the 8 that were listed in that touring plans article. They said up to 2 attractions per day, and to your point, that might mean that there are more than 2 attractions in any given park that are eligible for this upcharge, but you can only do 2 of them using the faster service. They left themselves open to the vagueness in the language that they chose to use. So how that manifests itself, we know about 70% of how this is going to shake out.
Okay, so I have one more question on relating to this, which is, so let's say they put this in place with all the different names or whatever, and for some reason they said, hey, Tim, I really like your podcast. Can you come in and tell us how to fix it? It's failing. People hate it. The satisfaction's low. They don't want to come back. Everybody's mad. So without just saying, the easy answer is get rid of it all. Let's try not to say that. Is there a way to fix this or to change it that somehow makes sense and you cannot just say destroy it?
So there's some interesting, I'm not skirting your question, I'll certainly get to it, but there's some interesting things that they did here. They spent a lot of money on the FastPass Plus infrastructure, the next-gen infrastructure, and all of this is going to roll into that. Technology is something that depreciates much quicker than a building, much quicker than any number of things that are traditionally depreciated. But there are components of FastPass Plus that are still going to be present in this. The ability to schedule attractions for somebody that has a disability pass, for example, that still is going to exist, and that's going to use the FastPass Plus infrastructure. So I think that, like I regularly do on my show, there needs to be some semblance of what they are doing that stays in place. So there needs to be a component of this that is retained. So there's a few things that I would do. One, I mean, this is the fan in me talking, but I would eliminate any cost associated with it. Or at least eliminate a cost associated with it for certain guests. Those staying on property, perhaps annual pass holders to a certain extent. I recognize that they want to move away from annual pass holders, which I think is a mistake, but that's, again, their choice, not mine. DVC, Club 33 members, all of those, at the very least, should have some version of this either free or heavily discounted. If I want to make it equitable for everybody, which is my preference, is I would eliminate the individual attraction services. I would digitize MaxPass on their system, and that's what I would do. I would basically have this be MaxPass. There would be no paper. You do it all on the app, and everybody is equal upon entering the park. I would eliminate the 7 a.m. ability to book things. I would make it so you get into the park and then you are eligible to make your first selection of the day. and go from there. So it would basically be the legacy FastPass rules on a digitized system. To me, I keep coming back to that. FastPass really wasn't broken that much in the 14 to 15 years it existed before they added the plus at the end of it and capitalized it. They had a system that worked, and they realized this in Disneyland. They looked at what they did in Florida, and they said, well, that's dumb. That's not working. And recognizing that the two resorts operate differently. But they supplemented the FastPass system with a digitized version of it. And that was wildly popular even at that $15 price point. I think just digitizing the entire thing would be the biggest step forward from a guest satisfaction standpoint, and really what I wanted out of Next Gen in the first place. I wanted to be able to show up to a park day of, walk in, ride Spaceship Earth, and while I'm waiting in line for Spaceship Earth, get a fast pass for Soarin', book my reservation for Le Cellier, and plan out the first few points of my day. And we haven't gotten to that yet. They're like 70% of the way there, and they keep on finding ways to mess it up. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating because the only thing I didn't like about Paper FastPass was like you had to run.
Yeah.
Like the run to Toy Story Mania, there was a run to Soarin', but the run to Toy Story Mania was one of the more ridiculous things I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
After that, it opened. I think it was I was there in 2008, so I don't know, it might have been, but it was still nuts. And I was like, okay, this can't be the best way we do this.
No, clearly.
Where it's like I just gave up on the FastPass line and ran right to the standby because it was faster. But doing that with a family, it was, oh my gosh, it was crazy.
I only did that rope drop at Toy Story once, and it was with a large group. Family friends joined us, and I don't know how strongly I emphasized that you needed to be there early. And I said, if you want to ride this ride, and this was at the time, believe it or not, Toy Story was the biggest thing in the studios. I say that
in the resort, basically.
Yeah, and at one point in time, the Little Mermaid show was the biggest thing in the studio. So times certainly shift and change. But I said, if you want to get on this ride twice, this is what you have to do. And sure enough, they show up 15 minutes late, and we only get on it once because that's what we had for an option. And it really was that drastic where that 15 minutes that the day started, you lost 2 hours if you wanted to ride the ride twice. So anyway.
Yeah,
sorry.
and it was, no, that's okay. That's a good point though, because it's good to remember, like you mentioned with Flight of Passage, with Standby, it's good to remember that the other systems weren't perfect.
No, they weren't.
But it seems like with each system, we're getting worse each time. I don't understand it. I don't know if this is worse, but, this is worse in a different way than FastPass Plus.
I want to give a better answer to your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said, what would the system be? First off, I look at, I assume you're a Marvel fan, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm a fan. I don't buy comics every week or anything, but I've seen all the
fans of the movies and everything. Okay. So if you look at the evolution of Tony Stark's suit, there is something subtle that they do that fixes a problem that the suit the problem that the suit faces in a prior movie, and he was up to like Mark 50 something by the time he died in Avengers Endgame. Spoiler alert. And
come on, Tim.
Perhaps that's the naming dynamic that they should be doing. It should be FastPass Mark 5 and figure out the flaws of it. As it evolves, you can continue to see it. I mean, that's what they did for a naming mechanism for the monorails. But you can continue to tweak these things, and just digitizing the entire thing on the platform that they built for Next Gen, that's the easy solution. Don't overthink it.
Right. And there are other ways to make more money. Like you said, if they really feel like there has to be a financial component, I don't understand. I mean, we'll talk about annual passes in a minute. But the perks for resort guests going away, given the profit margins for like hotel meals and stuff, like breakfast, I don't understand why they don't want people to stay at their resorts. I just don't get it. The 30 minutes is not, I mean, I know Len Testa has talked about the 30 minutes is important, like to get there 30 minutes early, like they're setting up. But really, this seems like a no-brainer to give some sort of perk to resort guests and to some of your other valued people.
I think they're going to push people away from the resorts. They've done enough to do that. In 2005 and 2006, the approach was trap people on property. And they've clearly done work to say that isn't the best approach. There's no other, I should say, I hope they've done work to say that isn't the approach, and that these decisions are smarter than you and I talking about it. But on the face of it, it screams ignorance. And it screams not understanding the why of why that was done initially. They had the Magical Express was a means of, all right, if it's $200 to rent a car for a week, that $200 was money that was being spent on a vacation that was not going to Disney. How do we fix that? Well, if we build in we've now learned $32 a head round trip for Magical Express into the cost of our resort room, we tell people that it's complimentary shuttle service, then they don't rent a car. Bonus, they're now trapped on property unless they want to pay for a taxi at the time or now an Uber or a Lyft. That was part of the design. The other part of the design was the original Magic Your Way tickets, where each additional day after 5 days was $3. And getting the people in the park was one thing, but once you've got them in the park, they're also staying at your resorts. They're also buying your food. They're also buying your merchandise. And they're still probably spending $150 to $200 a head per person per day. And these were things and choices that Disney made. It's not quite the lost leader approach, but it was, how do we trap people on property where we have them as a captive audience and make it so that they're not going to see the other entertainment offerings? Universal was doing them all the favors in the world by having lousy entertainment offerings back in 2005 and 2006. Yes, there were some good things, but it wasn't what Universal is today. Now Universal has been building things up with Harry Potter, with Jurassic World now. They've been spending money left and right and just competing on an attraction building scale, and Disney's trying to find other ways to distract people. But they used to have the all-inclusive model, and they really don't anymore. They've tried to strip that out, and they're now seeing that people are recognizing that. People are going to start doing the math. It might take a couple of years for them to realize it, but I don't know about you. I think you do stay on property regularly, but I haven't stayed on property at Disney in 10 years. I don't see the value in it. And if I can stay at a place in 192 for half the price and get the same benefits of the FastPass system by paying for it, I'm still paying less for a vacation than somebody staying at a value resort, and I'm getting the same benefit of it. So why would I stay on property?
Yeah, and your point makes sense. I was always an off-site person until when you're going with a family, I just really got sick of parking and driving around the resort and the tram. Now the trams aren't even there, but the trams and the strollers, it sounds weird, but it was actually easier just to get on a bus and kind of deal with that for a few minutes. But
just for the Magic Kingdom. I'm with you for the Magic Kingdom. It is a giant pain in the you-know-what to go to the Magic Kingdom.
We went there a lot with the kids. That's what I'll say.
And I recognize that, but yes.
But my kids are getting older, and there have been, with FastPass Plus, like you said, there have been benefits, and I really like some of the resorts. So there are benefits. However, it's trickier when some of the things that were nice, like Magical Express, go away. It makes it easier to go, okay, we need to think about this more. When they had all those perks, it was an easier decision. Now it's like, okay, that cost a lot. And especially when you're talking values, where you compare that to off-site, you can get a condo for that. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
But annual pass holders, I want to talk about that.
Sure.
Because Disney recently announced Walt Disney World annual passes are back. We knew they were coming back. We didn't know how much. Then, it's funny because they announced the Magic Key Pass. Again, speaking of fun names, you got I'm not even going to go through all the names the Magic Key has. And then same with the Increda Pass or whatever. Enough. But regardless, to get to the point, at first when they announced the Magic Key, I thought it was better than I expected. I thought they were going to charge more. I thought they were going to have, I looked at it and I went, especially with monthly payment, if you're in California, I went, this sounds like a decent deal. And this was before I knew about the Genie. And you referenced it. The fact that those are not even offered as some sort of add-on annually. Like you could even say, okay, $15 a day. Well, you can get it for the whole year on your annual pass for $100 more, whatever. I don't understand it again because I feel like, especially in California, if you're going to have something, you can call it Magic Key, but something that's annual pass,
it's an annual pass.
Don't you think they would want to offer something that people want? I don't know. I don't get it. Help me out here. What is the deal?
So you said something at the outset of this. It wasn't as bad as you expected. That seems to be what they're targeting. That's not a high bar, but perhaps it's because our expectations are so low, and that in itself isn't good. But you're absolutely right. The Magic Key proposal wasn't as bad as I expected. Not proposal, but announcement. Wasn't as bad as I expected. I haven't had a Disneyland annual pass since they introduced the pass for both coasts, and when that was affordable. I may be dating myself, but that was like a $700 pass at inception, and now that doesn't get you halfway to like either one of them at this point as a non-resident. But they definitely have an annual pass, quote unquote, problem in Disneyland, and they view it as a problem. They absolutely do, which in itself is a problem. The fact that they view it as a problem, but they haven't figured out really what to do here, and I think they're trying a bunch of different things. So this was perhaps the least offensive version of this trying, but by eliminating parking other than the highest tier, I think that was very targeted, because the way that many Southern California residents use Disneyland is they use it as a mall. They'll go there, they'll hang out for a few hours, maybe ride a ride or two, but they'll just hang out, and they're not giving Disney any money. They're just going and hanging out. And in Disney's eyes, those are not the types of guests that they want. They want people that are going in and spending money. But your average Disneyland annual pass holder is not spending money, even the same way that the average Disney World annual pass holder is. And sure, certainly not the same as a resort guest is spending money. So they're trying to find ways to do it. And if that is as simple as getting $25 a head for parking, that's probably more than they were getting from some of these people on any given day. So I think that's part of it. The same would be true of the Disney Genie program, where, again, an additional $15 a head. I imagine that you're going to get a lot of Disneyland pass holders that are going to show up and not pay for Disney Genie. They're going to say, I'm here for 3 hours. I'm going to hang out. Maybe I'll go on Pirates where it doesn't have a long wait, or I'll hang out with friends and not even go on rides, or just go on the things that don't have waits or long waits. And that's how they'll plan their day. I don't think they know what's going to happen with how all this shakes out, and that's part of why they're doing it this way. There are plenty of ways that they can adjust this, and until they see how the crowds react to it, they're not going to know what those ways are. In Florida, I think there's a little bit of them treating the Florida annual pass holders like the California ones. And the biggest hit here for me, or not for me directly, but the thing that you have to have the optics of, is that the increase on a Florida resident annual pass that is good for 365 days a year is exorbitant. It has gone up significantly since October of 2018, and then they added 50% to it 2 days ago, or whenever they made the announcement. They jacked that up so that your Florida resident and non-Florida resident annual pass are virtually, or not virtually, they are the same price. Now, having said all that, the biggest sacrifice you make from taking a step down the ladder is you don't have those last 2 weeks of the year, and you don't have Thanksgiving week. I think if they had eliminated just the Thanksgiving week from that, I think you'd have a little bit happier audience. I think the last 2 weeks of the year, I get not wanting to have annual pass holders there. And if you have a pass that for $300 or $400 less gets you to 345 days a year, I think that's a little bit more reasonable, because the price point for that pass is pretty similar. But I think a lot of people did go to those parks over Thanksgiving. The crowds, while it's crowded, it's certainly not the same as those 2 weeks between around Christmas, before and after Christmas. So those are kind of the small things that I think they may have to tweak as the days go by. And if the crowds are as quiet as they are now, I mean, this is as quiet as Disney World has ever been since probably 9/11. They're going to probably adjust those. They're going to open up the blockout dates to people that previously were blacked out.
Yeah, it's interesting because you reference, how dead it is right now. And granted, this isn't the busiest time, but there's a lot of factors. But still, I still wonder overall how people are going to respond, even when, because, you had a pretty big rush on Disney World or on the parks this summer, but they had a stretch, in the, before everything shut down, where year round, you were having they had a lot of international guests, you're not saying whatever. Are they going to be able to keep it? But another factor too with this, I feel like, is with both annual passes on both sides, is them adding in the component, which they started during the pandemic, of park reservations and having only so many. Like, even I looked at Florida or the Walt Disney World, where where you can only have 5 at a time. And I'm like, there are people that are not residents of Florida that might take long trips.
Yeah.
And so you're saying you're going to, like, I don't do it that long, but people take 2-week trips that have an annual pass that can only reserve 5 days. There are just things, and I know what they're trying to do in California because, again, you referenced the parking. The reservations there is really to keep people from using it like a mall or from using it like a local park. But in Florida, I look at, because people don't, I mean, I'm speaking in general, but you don't see probably as many annual pass holders from outstate that go to Disneyland and stay 2 weeks.
No.
But there are people that do that in Florida. So it seems like, again, that one size fits all both ways. It's not exactly the same, but it's close. That's going to have to change at some point, I think.
I have a trip coming up November, December, where we have 8 park days planned. And I have an annual pass. Right now, everybody else that's going on the trip has 8-day park hoppers. And they can make we've already made their reservations for those 8 days. I can make 3 right now as an annual pass holder. And I'm sure that a visit to guest services, if for whatever reason I'm blacked out and the 7 other family members are not blacked out on a given day, they'll probably make that right. But I'm also going first week of December. I would imagine that annual pass holders would have availability every day of that trip to every park. And as I think this is something that's going to be here to stay, and I'm not totally sure I know the motivation of it. They're going to say it's for scheduling, it's for things like that. But there really isn't, I don't think, a major benefit to that information. I think that they're not going to move people around to the extent that they could if, for whatever reason, there's a run on Epcot one day. Because nothing, they've got 50 years of data for how people tour. They know, and people over at Touring Plans probably have this a little bit more refined, but they know that people generally arrive on a Saturday or Sunday. They generally start at the Magic Kingdom and go in sequential order of when the park's open, like traditionally. It's not true of everybody, but that's largely when you see the crowds for the parks. And they know that, I don't know if this is true, but let's say that Animal Kingdom is less crowded on Tuesday than it is on Wednesday. They know that. If third-party people like Touring Plans can predict the crowds based on their data mining, Disney should have better information than that. And the need for reservations, it's an odd choice. I don't fully understand or grasp the why of it, other than just an added confusion. But if my choice is book 3 fast passes 60 days in advance or book a reservation at any point really ahead of the trip, I'll take that reservation every time. Because I generally know what park I want to go to. I just don't like being hamstrung by being an annual pass holder only having the choice of 5. Because I go back to the trapping people on property approach that they had here. That if you do, as an annual pass holder now, it used to be that, and by used to be I mean last week, that you could have an annual pass and 2 trips of 4 to 5 days in a calendar year justified the price of that annual pass. Now it's 7 days plus. So if it's 7 days plus to justify an out of state annual pass, shouldn't I have the ability to book 7 reservations? I would think that's somewhat logical. And again, this is the announcement on day 1. I imagine that they're going to get feedback and these things are going to be tweaked. But at the outset, this is what it is, so this is what we're dealing with. They also made mention of what they're referring to as bonus reservations. I don't know if that means that the entire month of September you don't need a reservation. That remains to be seen. What I anticipate it'll probably be is that for the low crowd times of the year, you're probably going to have to book reservations on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but maybe not on Monday and Tuesday. And so that's all up in the air, and we'll probably learn a little bit more on September 8th when they officially roll out the annual passes. But right. I'm with you on the reservations. It's, in the grand scheme of things, though, it's a blip in the inconvenience factor.
It's not a big deal, but
it's just another annoyance that they probably didn't have to do.
You know, I hate to be so... I mean, I don't even think we're being negative. I just think what we're talking about shows the complexities of each thing that are being announced. There's nothing that's that straightforward, which makes me wonder, you know, the thing is, like, here's the thing. I've always been somebody who's really focused on attractions, on new rides, on things. We've been talking for like an hour, And we haven't talked about any of the rides that are coming, because that tells you something about, I mean, I could have asked about it. I'm just saying, though, that tells you something about what's on the minds of a lot of Disney fans and what they've been announcing. Because, we have Ratatouille, which I know we kind of know what that is, but coming very soon. They're building Tron. Someday, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind will open. So 3 big attractions, plus a few smaller ones like Moana, Journey of Water, and things like that. So there's a lot of things happening. It's not like there's nothing happening. But I don't know. I mean, I think, especially with Ratatouille opening so soon with the 50th anniversary, I don't know. I feel like the timing wasn't great, but I guess they still are going to be releasing a lot of attractions, which is good. Like, looking into the future, I feel like they've got a lot going on in the next year or two, at least.
Oh, they absolutely do. And we touched upon this, that they're playing catch up from 2017 to 2022, because they didn't really build much other than New Fantasyland for the 11 to 12 years prior. Probably 11 years. I think went from Toy Story Mania, which was, I think, Iger's last project. Eisner's last project, and the last announced project. And then they spent a lot of money over in California Adventure. So Florida got neglected for a multitude of reasons. But in 2017 to 2022, as a Disney fan, sure, not everything was a slam dunk, but they built a lot. You certainly can't complain that they weren't building things. I think I walked out on my last trip, Hollywood Studios. I'd listen to arguments now of this being the 3rd best Disney park in the country. I wouldn't agree with it, but I would at least listen to arguments about it. You're shaking your head no. We're on a video call here, but I think, and you're shaking your head no. You also haven't been on Rise of the Resistance. I think the ride is that good.
That is true. Or Runaway Railway. I have been on Slinky Dog though, and on Smuggler's Run.
But to that point, like, all right, Slinky Dog was better than I expected it to be. I expected it to be a step above Barnstormer. I think it's 2 steps above Barnstormer. That sort of thing. And there are some people that don't like Smuggler's Run. I think if you've got a group, Smuggler's Run is a great attraction. So to that point, they have certainly made improvements. And for me as a fan, I've been on the show, what did you say now, 6 times? I think I've complained about Epcot for 5 of them. And I'm pretty happy with the direction that 3 of the 4 parks are going in Florida. I think that there's certainly additions that can be made. I think Animal Kingdom, and I think you're leading towards this next line of questioning, but with Guardians and Tron coming up in the next year, I'd be very surprised if they both didn't open in 2022. I think you mentioned Journey of Water and some of the other things going on in Epcot. I think that's going to probably stretch into 2023. But I think Guardians and Tron probably open next year. Those are major additions. Those are not inexpensive additions either. With Tron, as you said, we know what it is, much like Ratatouille. We've seen it elsewhere. With Guardians, there is a huge unknown there. And the thing we know about it, we know what the IP is, we know it's a roller coaster, and we know that it very well could be the most expensive thing that they've ever built for a single attraction. The budget is ridiculous. So it's going to be the anchor of Epcot. I hope it hits on all levels. If Rise of the Resistance shows me what they can do with a ridiculous budget like that, then I am optimistic. I think there can be certainly arguments about the direction of, or the appropriateness of a Guardians of the Galaxy attraction in Epcot, but I don't think it's going to matter. I think to 95% of the guests, it's not going to matter, and it'll probably be a home run. So those are all positives, but you're leading into the what's next after that, because us as Disney fans, we always have to ask, when's the next e-ticket opening up? When's the next e-ticket opening up? And at this point, because of the uncertainty of the world we live in, we can predict what they're going to be, but I don't know what the timetable is going to be. I think Universal continuing to put the screws to them will help push these things forward. But we know that they've pulled back some Epcot projects. So I imagine that the next major attraction that will be announced will be in Epcot. I suspect it will be either or both a New World Showcase Pavilion or an update to Imagination. The leader in the clubhouse for the last decade seemed to be a Brazil Pavilion and World Showcase. Probably not going to happen. Doesn't seem likely right now. And this is not based on any inside information other than I occasionally watch the news. I just don't think that a Brazil Pavilion is likely going to happen, which probably means that they will finally move forward with an Imagination update. And there were builds. I saw them back in 2017. There are internal documents that made the rounds. There were multiple different builds for a 5 to 7 year plan for Epcot. And in all of those plans that I saw, it included a significant budget to update Imagination, a significant budget to add a World Showcase Pavilion. In both cases, it was Brazil. I could also see them dusting off the plans for that Events Pavilion. I think that is a moneymaker, so clearly that's going to be something that as soon as they feel they have the appropriate funds to spend on it, they could do it. The other intriguing thing, I said that I'm not overly optimistic about the future of Epcot. I think there are absolutely things that they can do that were considered at one point in time to make me optimistic about the future of Epcot. And one of those things is an update to the seas. There was absolutely a plan to update the seas and likely take Nemo out of it, at least in the ride itself. The ride, I think, from a quality of ride standpoint, perfectly fine for a quality of ride. Ben, my co-host on Marty Called, had a suggestion. You can turn this into a ride that's befitting of Epcot with a few minor changes. You basically have Mr. Ray teaching the kids about marine life, and that's your ride. And that works in Epcot. It's a small change, and I don't know that that's what they're going to do, but it was... I mean, he spent 5 minutes and came up with that idea, and it made more sense for Epcot than we lost Nemo again. So I think the next step for them is Epcot. Continuing what they've done, tweaking what the announced plan was in the 2019 Expo, and I could see that being an update to Imagination. It's a fanboy wish and ask, but I also think it is grounded in reality this time around. But having said that, if they announce that tomorrow, it opens in 2026. So that's kind of how they do things. Their sense of urgency is 5 years, not a year from now. They're not Universal turning around Transformers in 14 months. There are other things in the other parks that I think happen, but I think Epcot is the next step.
Yeah, I think, obviously I would enjoy, I think I would enjoy an update to Imagination. I'm going to assume it's going to be amazing. I would love to see a new pavilion. And the seas, I feel like the current attraction kind of wastes the aquarium in a way.
Yeah,
like,
I
really,
agree.
I feel like you've got this amazing aquarium. And I'm not saying they should, just go back to the sea caps, because obviously that they need something more. In our modern society with how theme parks work.
I know it's blasphemy. I didn't like the sea caps.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people are just kind of, it's kind of boring, whatever. But at least you could see the aquarium.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to mix the two in some way. Like, okay, if you want to have Nemo, like you said, something with learning, and I know we're almost going into a different podcast, but I can't help it. But to me, yeah, I would love to see all that in Epcot, and they're going to need to do something. I think that leads us well into kind of our last main thing we want to talk about. And I'm going to say this up front, talking about Universal, because I'm going to say a bunch of good things about Universal and what they could do. Their indoor mask policy, just bad news. I have to say it. I think they should have followed Disney's lead. I'm just going to say that up front. We don't need to, but I don't, because again, I also think if you set that aside, they have done a lot of really good things and interesting things lately. The Velocicoaster, I have not ridden it, so I'm only going by many people that I respect's reaction. Seems to be a home run. It's also an addition. It adds capacity.
Yep.
And I feel like, obviously we can go backwards and say, Kong seems to be pretty good. Transformers, Harry Potter. There's a lot of things, but they're making additions, you referenced it earlier, to their park.
Yep.
So now you see, and Universal's over here, they're looking at Disney and going, their fans seem really mad. Mm-hmm. Our fans seem pretty happy right now. We don't have as many, but we are growing. What can Universal, you talked about this on your show, but what can Universal do? So they can do something short term, but even long term to continue this trend, because I don't want to see Disney do poorly or fail. But I also like the fact that if Universal does good things, it may push Disney to do good things too.
I think they should continue to push. What they've been doing has produced better things from Disney. I think if Disney had got Harry Potter, Universal very well may not be open today. I think the parks were that close to being shut down, being sold off for being sold off for parts, for lack of a better word, where individual attractions, something like the Hulk, could have been sold as a actual roller coaster to move to another theme park somewhere. Those types of things were probably closer than anybody is willing to admit. And I don't know if you toured Universal in the years prior to Harry Potter opening.
Yes, I did.
You saw
a couple of years before.
They would flat out admit the team members. I remember going through Poseidon's Fury, and I asked if the water was working. I was like, "Yeah, we're not going to run that until Harry Potter opens." Like they would flat out say that at the end of the or at the beginning of the attraction. And yes, that's just one team member spouting off what was the unofficial company line, but probably the official company line. But I think at this point, I said it about an hour ago, Disney has never been more vulnerable. So if I'm Universal, continue to do what you're doing, because there's always going to be missteps. But if you don't keep trying to build major new additions, then you're sleeping you're resting on your laurels. But yes, you're going to have a failure here and there. But for every failure, there's a Velocicoaster, there's a Harry Potter, there's a Kong. All of those things are great additions to that to those parks. And building Epic Universe in the time frame that it takes Universal to build things, at this point, Disney has no means of responding to that. And if not for COVID, they probably would have had that ready to go on Disney's 51st anniversary. Disney was planning on doing a 2-year celebration for their 50th anniversary, and I think Universal's plan was, all right, we'll let them have that. And then we'll open Epic Universe, and then it'll be our turn. So continue to do that. The one thing, there's plenty of things where they can do to target some of the cuts that Disney has done, and we talked about it on the show, and we'll go over Skipper Ben's idea for a commercial, which I thought was brilliant. But I think they need to address the fact that Universal does not cater to the 7 and under crowd. And that means additions to each of the parks. That means family-friendly rides. And they do have some of them in their arsenal that they've built between DreamWorks and Imagine Studios based attractions that need to be added to the parks that have zero height requirement, that you can bring an infant on. Because right now, there's not much of a motivation to bring a child that is under the age of 5 to Universal Studios. Yeah. And that will always be Disney's bread and butter. So if you want to just let Disney have that, fine. But if you truly want to compete with them, they need to go after that demographic with family-friendly rides. And that's not spinners. That's a true dark ride. That's Fantasyland-style dark rides. That's boat rides that the entire family can ride, that don't have a lap restraint, that don't have a height requirement. Those types of things. It's not the things that are going to perhaps totally move the needle attendance-wise. It's not opening a roller coaster, but it's what they need to round out those parks, because they have the thrill rides. They have the thrill rides that, for the most part, are better than Disney's thrill rides. It's those smaller secondary C and D ticket attractions that they need to round out those parks, and that's what I would focus on, just from a building standpoint.
Yeah, I agree, and I think having taken, after Harry Potter opened, we went there, and my daughter at the time, I think, was like 2.5, and we really wanted to see Hogsmeade, so we went. But there was a lot of, after we did then this was before they've opened a few things since, but we did the Dr. Seuss land, rode everything there. But then there was a lot of, okay, I'm going to go ride this, and then I'll come back out, and then you'll watch her. Yeah. And granted, there's some of that at Disney, but we took her to Disney on that same trip, and obviously you have a lot more that you can do.
I mean, Animal Kingdom and Hollywood Studios have the same problem. So it's not like Disney's exempt from this. But anyway.
Magic Kingdom doesn't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right. And a little bit of Epcot. I agree. And no, it's not apples or oranges. It's kind of like, but they're both kind of leaning in a different direction. And Disney now, more recently, has been adding more thrill rides to try and kind of push to that direction. So, everybody has their own lane. But something interesting, too, the Secret Life of Pets attraction, I have not ridden it, but looks really cool that they put into Hollywood. They made some, what I thought were really interesting updates, so they kept breaking down to the Jurassic Park. They made it Jurassic World in Hollywood. And then today, I watched on YouTube the Jurassic, I forget the exact name, but the Jurassic World attraction in Beijing from the preview.
It's ridiculous.
Oh my gosh. I don't even understand how you have like the one scene with the dinosaur chasing you. Mm-hmm. It's like Dinosaur at Disney, but to this incredible other extreme. They mix in screens, if those animatronics keep working like on daily use or whatever, it just shows you. I mean, Forbidden Journey is already one of the most amazing attractions I've seen, Spider-Man, whatever, but this is something else, Tim. I mean, if they do things like this at Epic Universe, look out.
Absolutely. We always joke on Marty Called that the best way to experience a theme park attraction is watching a YouTube video.
Yes.
And there are absolutely things that don't translate. I've been told probably 36 times that our take on the Mario Kart attraction was not fair because we were judging it by a YouTube video. And that's a perfectly fair assessment. Having said that, when we rave about something that translates well to a YouTube video, such as the Beijing Jurassic World attraction, there's got to be some credibility to it, because we're being blown away by seeing it on a computer screen, and we're not being chased by a 50-foot dinosaur. If you haven't watched this and you have no intentions of going to Beijing and want to be surprised by it, this dinosaur turns a corner. The Charging Carnotaurus on Dinosaur is a very impressive figure that chases you. This is that times 2. It really is that impressive. And the how of how it works, Ben got into it on our show. One of the things that we do on Marty Called, not to self-promote here, is we try to understand how some of this stuff works from an Imagineering perspective. So the ride vehicles on this Beijing Jurassic World attraction are similar enough to the scoop vehicles in Spider-Man. And they frame the scene so that those vehicles can rotate a full 360 degrees, and they circle around this dinosaur, which is also on a circular track. So by doing that and the way that the scene is mapped out, the dinosaur chases you and then goes back into position 1, basically, to reset for the next vehicle that comes through. And it's seemingly incredibly well designed. I'd love to see kind of an overhead of the mechanics of all of it, but the execution, just as you can see it in a YouTube video, and I'm sure it's 10 times more impressive in person, is outstanding. They really knocked it out of the park here. And I sincerely hope that something like that comes stateside, because it is truly impressive. I mean, Spider-Man is my favorite attraction on Universal property, and there aren't many physical props that are moving in it. There isn't a lot of motion other than what's on the screens, and it does it so well. This combines those screens with physical sets, with gigantic dinosaur animatronics, and it really just is a total wow attraction. And I'd love to experience it in person, and I don't know that I'm going to Beijing anytime soon. So,
yeah, I felt pretty safe watching that one. I didn't think I was going to be making the trip to Beijing soon, but I'm just excited by things like that, because I feel like for the industry, I mean, even this is just straight up roller coasters, but in Orlando, you've got Iron Gwazi, which everyone's excited about coming to Busch Gardens, or SeaWorld has a coaster coming. It's good to see. Even, I hate to call them secondary, but let's, group beyond just the 2 biggest vendors in Orlando, others that are putting out big attractions in a different way. But seeing this video makes me think, wow, what is possible? What haven't we seen? And I know Rise of the Resistance does that too. So that's when that's working, it's, mind-blowing from what I've heard. So lots of good things on the horizon. I just hope that's why I don't like getting bogged down in things like paid FastPass and everything, because there's excitement, but it's a big part of trips, unfortunately.
I would love it if these discussions were raving about how are they going to outdo each other next. And we've been having that conversation in the Disney and Universal fan communities for 15 years, that we want to see theme park wars. That's absolutely what we want to see. We want to see them go back and forth with attraction building. And there's been that in the last 5 years. But I also think Disney is willing to set it aside. I think they're willing to try different things other than building new attractions. The last 5 to 6 years notwithstanding, because I think there was some catch-up going on there. But I also think if they believe that Genie is the solution to Epic Universe, they will be mistaken. They will have another boom where they have to build things. But I don't know what to expect from Cosmic Rewind. If that ultimately shakes out to be their response to Velocicoaster, or if it's something that Universal has to in turn respond to, I don't know. But I know that Disney can't be resting on their laurels and assume that they're going to be successful. It's just not going to work because Universal isn't taking their foot off the pedal. They're continuing to build, and they made a promise years ago to put an e-ticket in the parks, or at least put one in each year, up until the point where they opened a water park, and now they're opening another theme park. So they know that they were behind, that they were having to continue to build to reach Disney standards. And while the individual attractions may have been there at Disney standards, they still had to build a resort up to that size. And they don't have the same size that Disney does, but they are still doing a very good job at pushing them. And I hope that Disney recognizes it and doesn't just let more slip away to Universal, because if they continue to go back and forth and continue to try to outdo each other, then the people that benefit are you and me, the patrons that go to it. And then we're far more willing to spend money if the product is premium. If Disney and Universal have both positioned themselves as premium luxury brands that justify some of these prices, then okay, then it's an easier pill to swallow if they've continued to step up their game. But if I'm paying $200 a day to go to the Magic Kingdom and they don't add anything after Tron for another decade, then why am I paying $200 to go in there? So those are the types of questions that I have looking forward. And I'm not sure that they know what the answers are.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to, well, mostly close out. I want to finish. Can I ask you a few totally random kind of quick questions just to end on these? Actually are probably not as stupid as the ones I asked you last time.
Are they about baseball?
No, but there might be a reference to a few things like that in it. So, okay. So first of all, you need to tell me which of these three things is the ugliest recent addition that you've seen. The Guardians of the Galaxy show building, the Harmonious barges, which we have not mentioned, or the recent Major League Baseball All-Star uniforms. Which are the ugliest?
Did you throw in the All-Star uniforms at the last minute or what?
No, that was there. It's on my paper I'm looking at.
Okay. It's the barges, because they are in an area that was previously designed to have great views. The aesthetic of World Showcase, I talked about art direction being something that Disney still hits out of the park. For people like myself that complained about Frozen going into Norway, the art direction in the area was still great. The additions that they made were very befitting of the pavilion. And now you have these giant things in the middle of it. And Harmonious very well can be the best thing that they've done from a nighttime show. But they're on stage for 12 hours a day and only going to be used for 15 minutes of real functional time. So that is a bigger issue to me than the Guardians building. Bigger than the uniforms, though. Is it worse than that? Those uniforms were pretty bad, but that's you know what? I'm gonna take a serious answer to that. Whenever people complain about the aesthetics of like the wand over Epcot, over Spaceship Earth, or the castle cake, inevitably it always comes up Stitch TPing the castle, and people say that's the worst one. Like that was 3 days. Okay, yeah. The baseball uniforms, that was 2 days. Harmonious, that's going to be out on the lagoon for a decade, and that's awful. So I think with Guardians, you're not going to hide it from the parking lot. I think they've given up on a lot of that stuff. The fact that the building is 135 feet tall or whatever it is makes it hard to hide, but when it's done, in theory, they can hide it a little bit better. I say that, and there's still plenty of angles from the parking lot where you can see the Pandora building. But Everest is now hidden in the parking lot. You really can't see Everest. It doesn't stand out the way that it used to, 5 years ago. There's been enough tree growth. So these things are kind of ultimately solvable. The barges are not. It's so funny, and I want to get going to the other questions, but it's so funny that I talked about all the things coming up at Disney, and I didn't even mention Harmonious. It was totally not on purpose. I said Tron, Guardians. I totally skipped the thing that's coming out literally in like a month. Yeah. It's like, okay. Okay, so I'm going to give you, we're going to do them one at a time. Okay. 4 attractions. You have 3 choices for these attractions. These are all Disney World attractions. Okay. You can wait 2 hours in line. Okay. Pay $25. Just you paying that, or don't ride. Those are your 3 options. So you get the idea. Okay. Yep. The first one is Test Track. What are you going to do? Not ride.
Okay. Second one, Flight of Passage.
I'll pay $25.
Okay. Kilimanjaro
once per
Safaris.
trip. Once per
yeah,
trip.
Yeah, This is like a one-time thing I'm thinking of. Kilimanjaro Safaris.
Safaris isn't going to have a 2-hour wait, but I'll play your game. It's my favorite attraction. I'll pay for it.
Yeah. Last one, Rise of the Resistance, assuming you haven't, especially if you've never ridden it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd pay $25 for it.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of guessed what you would say, except for I wasn't sure about Safari. But I know you love Safari. So, okay.
Interesting thing about that, if Safari is one of the attractions, I could see them positioning it at $4 or $5 and having that be a different dynamic for them to make money. Even at a half-hour wait, people say, I can get my family of 4 on here for $20 in 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, that's tempting to be like, I just paid $10 for a weird drink or something.
Exactly,
or whatever.
exactly.
It's like, my burger was $15. Okay, so next one. I don't know if you're as big of a football fan, but I think you are. So news came out today. The New England Patriots, this is so good timing, have waived Cam Newton. They're going to go with Mac Jones. So how many wins are they going to have this year? Remember.
17 games.
17 games, yes.
They go 10-7.
Probably good. I was thinking 8-8, but maybe 9-8. Yeah, you're right there. Okay. Okay. We're away from the sports, everyone, just to let you know. Okay. True or false,
True.
Tim?
Oh, sorry. I'll wait for the question.
I think you're probably not going to say true. The e-ticket attraction in Avengers Campus at DCA will be open before 2025.
2025. I'm going to need a specific date in 2025.
Before June 1st, 2025. Or July, July-ish.
Yeah, so let's say summer. I don't think it is. I think best case scenario is end of 2025.
Yeah, I knew that. I felt like that was the right cutoff to kind of not push it one way or the other. Okay, two more. Okay, when we look back at this era of Disney history, which of these shows do you think that we will remember most fondly? Okay, there's 3 options. Rivers of Light, Epcot Forever, or the Disney Kite Tales show. Which one will we remember most fondly?
The easy answer is none of the above. I think... So I'm going to say Kite Tales, and here's why. I think the expectations for Kite Tales are that there aren't any. So if you have no expectations, then you can't be disappointed. I think this will be a distraction for people, and I have zero issue with a distraction like that. I don't know that it's going to be any different to a lot of people than bringing an animal around. When they had camels roaming the park a few years ago, I don't even know if you knew that they did that.
I did not.
They had camels kind of going out as animal ambassadors around the park. I think this is going to be that level of distraction.
So if it's better than camels walking around the parks, it's, the correct answer was Rivers of Light, but I understand you don't like it as much as I do.
The expectations were too high for it. I mean,
that is true.
You're allowed to like Rivers of Light. I mean, I will question your opinion on anything, but you're allowed to at least like it. It certainly had its benefits, but to me, it didn't have enough. There wasn't enough there to steal a Jim Hill line, and that's why I kind of crapped all over it. But the music, for example, that music in a different show, I'm on board.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay, I realize this is very similar to the other one, but Last question. I had written this as 5 years, but I'm going to extend it.
Okay.
True or false? We will see a significant update to Spaceship Earth in the next 8 years.
Absolutely.
Significant.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think that it will probably happen within the next 5, possibly the next 3. But I also think that it's going to be down for a year and a half. So
that's unfortunate.
That's where the timing game can be played. But I think that they will be updating Spaceship Earth. I don't think that has been canceled.
Do you think it'll still focus on the power of light? Or whatever that last...
to be determined. The story light component of it. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the reason why the answer to that would be no is I'm not convinced that Bob Chapek is the CEO in 3 years. I think that his time in the company and perhaps, hopefully, the mandate of everything needing to be more timeless, more Disney, that sort of thing, that there is enough internal debate on some of those types of things where a change in leadership could shift the focus. So if projects like that are delayed, a change in leadership may see a shift in what the actual project is. But to the greater question of will Spaceship Earth see an update, something as integral to one of their parks as Spaceship Earth, this is the longest any version of it is run, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right. Yeah.
I think it opened in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, let me think. January 2008, but the Irons version opened in 94.
Yeah, so okay.
So we're right about there.
Yeah, so it's not quite
close.
there. The Irons version is the one that perhaps you and I are most familiar with, but I still, approaching the printing press scene, I still have in the back of my head, extra New York Daily, and it was something that I would annoy my parents with because it was really that sing-songy from the Walter Cronkite version. But this version has lasted quite a long time, and I anticipate changes within the next 5 years.
I'm both excited and nervous about any big update to Spaceship Earth. You know, I think it's necessary at some point, given how the descent is and things. But again, though, big last thing. A lot depends on the directions of the parks. The things we've talked about, to kind of circle back, things we've talked about in terms of what they're doing with attractions and what they're doing with FastPass or Lightning Lane and everything else. A lot of those things are going to play out in the next few years.
Sure.
And could impact Chapek, could impact what all of us do with the parks. And it's not going to be boring. I'll say there's going to be a lot of things. I just hope that somehow cooler heads prevail at a lot of these, and some of the positive things we've seen continue to do that going forward.
I want to clarify something on Chapek. I don't think it's the parks that is going to potentially get him ousted. I think it is going to battle with people that are part of multi-billion-dollar franchises. I think the inexperience that he has, and I say this as somebody that has 30 plus years of experience in the industry, but in this level of role, I don't think his inexperience is showing in a lot of cases. So unless that changes drastically, I anticipate a change of leadership, and I have no idea who that would be. But I think he is subject to review in a couple of years, and that will be the chance for them to change course.
No, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because obviously, and just given the changing nature of entertainment with Disney Plus, and like you mentioned earlier, with movie theaters. And personally, I'm a gigantic movie fan. I used to go to movie theaters all the time. A lot of it is the pandemic, but I was already going less. The pandemic has basically shut it down for me, obviously, but that I don't know if I'll go back as often. So that's just one example. And we're not buying things at Disney Premiere. Like, I just wait. I'm like, well, that's fine. Just me as one example, anecdotally. But there are a lot of people like me, I think of my age too, that could have a huge impact on what happens with Disney going forward. So, who knows?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Tim, I feel like we've also hit on about 25 issues we could keep going on, but at some point people have to sleep. So before we finish, we've mentioned your podcast, Marty Called, but I'd love for you to make a pitch for that and everything else you're doing and where they can find you and follow you and everything.
Sure, thanks. So Marty Called is a show that I do with Skipper Ben, who has been a guest on Dan's show, as well as the Sultan of Saki, Josh, as we... his name is Josh. We call him the Sultan of Saki. He's not allowed on this show for a variety of reasons.
That is not true. That is being cut out now. But I will say Josh anytime. Go on, Tim.
The dynamic of the show, yes, we do touch on news, but we try to be analytical about it. I'm an accountant. Josh is a lawyer. Ben is a former cast member who now works in sports. So we come at it from a fandom first, but also try to ground things in reality and do a lot of armchair imagineering on the show, which if you were to look back at previous times on Dan's show, we've done some armchair imagineering as well. So I say this because I myself am not overly creative, but I enjoy the process. And both Ben and Josh would probably say similar things. It is an outlet of creativity, and it's a lot of fun for us to do it. I also have a website that tracks Disney news and rumors, WDW Theme Parks, and you can find me on Twitter, WDW theme parks.
Awesome, Tim. Well, this has been really fun, and I especially liked at the end we were talking about all the great stuff that's going to be brought to the parks. So hopefully that will win the day in my
Let's hope
brain.
so.
You know, but thanks so much. This was awesome.
Do I have more episodes than Len now?
Yes, you do. So congratulations for now.
Thanks for having me,
right.
man.
If you like this episode, check out Tim's podcast, Marty Called. It is worth your time and digs into a lot of the same issues in a cool way. You can also check out past episodes of the Tomorrow Society podcast with Tim, 5 of them, by going to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end. Wanted to give a shout out to my latest member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, Brian Flock. Brian, thanks so much. You are helping to keep this show going. If you would like to learn how to help support the show and get access to some cool perks, go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety to find out how you can make a small monthly contribution and really help out the show. If you'd like to get a hold of me, send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter @tomorrowsoc, Facebook or Instagram @tomorrowsociety. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. I hope you're all having fun out there. Go out there, get vaccinated. Let's beat this pandemic so we can all go to the parks and have an amazing time. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you again next time.